All right, in this video, we're just going to do transformations of the cosecant graph. So let's remind ourselves for a second. The cosecant graph, remember our asymptotes are at 0 and pi, and then over here at 2 pi. And it does scoop up first and scoops down here. So this is my left vertical asymptote, and this is my right vertical asymptote that we'll be solving for. So it's very similar to what we did with secant. So let's keep on going with this. So let's break this first thing down. Let's look at our values here. So A is -2, B is 3, C and D are both 0 in this example. So if I do my left vertical asymptote, I'm going to do 3x equals 0. Okay, divide by 3, I have x is 0. For my right vertical asymptote, I'm going to do 3x equals pi, divide by 3, so x is equal to pi over 3. All right, so that tells me where my asymptotes are going to be. All right, so I'm going to make my y-axis over here since everything's on the positive end. Now, what to keep in mind, okay, our period is going to be pretty small because if we have an asymptote at 0 and an asymptote at pi over 3, that's not much distance between the two. So really, it's a period of 2 pi over 3. So if I just do a pi over 3, and then I can make them further apart so we have a little more space here. I'm going to go by 3. So pi over 3, and then 2 pi over 3. Okay? So I'll show you how I get there. I know that whatever this distance is, it has to match here, right? So I just added a pi over 3. Now, A is -2. So in order to get my y values, remember it's y times A plus D. That's our new y value. Well, D is 0, but y is -2. So it's going to reflect it and take it down to -2. So instead of being -1, it's going to be -2. Just find the middle ground, and it'll be going down. And this one will go to +2. Okay, so my range will go -infinity to -2, +2 to +infinity. Where does it begin and end? Well, it begins at 0, it ends at 2 pi over 3. Now maybe it would have helped you to do the period 2 pi over b first. 2 pi over and b was 3, so that makes sense. That's our period. Asymptotes are at, we could do 0, it's fine. 0 plus n, now half of a period, so multiply that by 1/2 and I get 2 pi over 6, right? But that reduces to 1/3, doesn't it? So it's really n pi over 3. Our amplitude is the absolute value -2, so it's 2. And then domain is all reals except where x is equal to n pi over 3. Let's try the next one. Cosecant. Okay, so A is 1, B is 1, C is -pi, D is 0. So I'm going to do my left vertical asymptote, and I'm going to say what x plus pi equals -pi. Oh no, with this one, what is our left vertical asymptote? It's 0, isn't it? With cosecant, it's 0. So if I subtract pi, I have x equals -pi. So that's where we're going to start this guy. And my right vertical asymptote is at pi. So I would do x plus pi equals pi, but when I subtract that pi, I get 0. All right, so I know I'm going to have an asymptote at -pi, so I need to have a little bit of space here on the left. So if I do -pi and 3 tick marks, 3, there's pi. 2 pi. That sounds about right. Okay, an asymptote here. Next asymptote was at 0. So there's a distance of pi here, and that means the next asymptote will be at +pi. All right, A is 1, so we're sticking to the up scoop. And we'll just find the middle ground between these asymptotes, and we'll scoop up. Middle ground between these at -1, scoop down, okay? So my range is going to be -infinity to -1, bracket, +1 to +infinity. Where does this all begin? Well, it all begins at -pi, and it ends at +pi. My period is 2pi over b, which is 1, so it's just 2pi. Asymptotes, we can start with 0, that's fine, plus n and half the period, pi. Amplitude was 1, so then my domain is all reals except where x equals n pi. Let's try the next, or maybe you might want to pause the video and try this one on your own and come back and check. You do what you need to do. Okay, so I see that A is 2, B is 1/3. B is 1/3, so let's see what that's going to do. So my left vertical asymptote is going to be 1/3 x equals 0. So that means it's still x is 0. My right vertical asymptote is going to be 1/3 x equals pi. So if I multiply both sides by 3, I'm going to get 3 pi for that next vertical asymptote. Okay, so I'm going to put my y-axis over here. And stop and think. If I have an asymptote at 0 and at 3 pi, that's half the period. So that means the full period will take me all the way to 6 pi. So I'm going to do, let's do a pi, 2 pi, 3 pi, 4 pi, 5 pi, 6 pi. Okay, so we have a 0, a 3 pi, a 6 pi. Okay, now what about my y values? The y values are going to multiply by 2, so instead of being at 1, it's going to be at 2. So it still scoops up because it's +2, and this will scoop down because it's -2. The range will be -infinity to -2, +2 to +infinity. Where does it begin? It begins at 0. It ends at 6 pi. Okay, so 2 pi over 1/3. If you keep it, change it, flip it, it's 2 pi times 3, which does indeed give us the 6 pi. Asymptotes, okay, 0 plus n and then half of the period, 3 pi. So we would say 3n pi. And the amplitude is a 2. And then our domain is all reals except where x is equal to 3n pi. All right, let's try the ones on the back. All right, let's look at number 4. Again, you can always pause the video, try this on your own. Let's see, A is -1, B is 1, C is 0 because it's not in parentheses. This 1/2 is actually my D value, okay? So we'll deal with that when we do our y's. But let's do our asymptotes. Let's think about this. My left vertical asymptote would be bx minus c equals 0. Well, b is 1 and c is 0, so it's just going to be the same, isn't it? X is 0. That means my right vertical asymptote is, which is bx minus c equals pi. Again, b is 1, so x is just pi. Thankfully, those didn't change, so we can start graphing this. I'm going to put my y-axis over here, and I'm going to measure out my pi's. Okay, I'm going to do 3 tick marks. Pi, 2 pi, 3 pi, 4 pi. Not that I need it, but there you go. All right, my first asymptote is at 0. My next asymptote is at pi. The next one, same distance away, is at 2 pi. Okay, now, what's happening with my y values? Remember, it's y times a plus d. So my +1 that normally go right here is going to become -1, so I multiply it. And then I add a half. So it's going to make it -1/2. My -1 times the negative is going to be a +1, add a half, it's going to move it up just a half, so it's going to be +3/2. So, okay, -infinity to -1/2, and then it jumps to 3/2, +3/2 to +infinity. Where does this begin? It begins at 0. It ends at 2 pi. D is what's the period? Well, 2 pi over 1 is still 2 pi. My asymptotes are going to be 0 plus n times half the period, so pi. And then the amplitude is the absolute value of -1, so it's just 1. So this is going to be all reals except where x is equal to n pi. Last one. All right, A is 3, B is 1, C is pi over 4. So what are we doing here? We're moving this thing to the right, pi over 4. So let's do our calculations. So this would be x minus pi over 4 is equal to 0. So that's shifting that asymptote a quarter of a pi. My right vertical asymptote is going to be x minus pi over 4 equals pi. So if I add a pi over 4, that means it's going to be at x is 5 pi over 4. Okay. So here, before I jump to graphing it, look, this one's going to be at pi over 4, and then I add a whole pi and get to 5 pi over 4. So let's think about where's the next asymptote going to be. If you add a whole pi, so 4 pi over 4, that's going to end up being at 9 pi over 4. So that's going to help me as I build my graph, okay? So let's do this. So let's do way over here. Let's see, pi over 4, 2 pi over 4, 3 pi over 4, 4 pi over 5 pi over 4, 6 pi over 4, 7 pi over 4, 8 pi over 4, 9 pi over 4. Okay, those are the key places I need. So I'm going to erase this one. I don't really need that one. But I'm going to put in my asymptotes. So it should make sense that the graph has shifted over to the right a quarter of a pi. And then my y values are going to be multiplied by 3. Remember y times a? So the 1 becomes a 3. The -1 becomes -3. There it is. So my range is -infinity to -3, and then jumps to +infinity, or +3 to +infinity. This begins at pi over 4. It ends at 9 pi over 4. Period is going to be 2 pi. Asymptotes are at pi over 4 plus, oops, that's a 4, plus n times half my period, so n pi. The amplitude is 3, and then I would do all reals except where x is equal to pi over 4 plus n pi. Okay, so now it's on to practicing some more when we get to class. Let me know what questions you have.